Hello and welcome to Growing Up B2B. I'm Delia, president of Delia Associates, the place where B2B brands go to grow. For over 60 years, and now across 2 generations, we've been helping B2B companies achieve next-level growth through brand distinction, quality lead generation, and sales enablement. Growing Up B2B was created for family business leaders who are passionate about growth, legacy, and making a lasting impact. Whether it's a multi-generational legacy or multiple family members working together, there's something truly magical about blending business with family. And we want to celebrate that right here on Growing Up B2B. So be sure to stick around to the end of the show and find out how you can be our next guest. Okay, let's get into it. Welcome to Growing Up B2B. I'm Delia, and I'm the second generation president of Delia Associates. We are the place where B2B brands go to grow. Hello and welcome to another episode of Growing Up B2B. I'm your host, Delia. I'm the second generation president of Delia Associates, the place where B2B brands go to grow. I'm really excited to introduce our guest today. He's Jens Duerr, Director of Marketing and Business Development for CMG Plastics, which is now a very global company. By way of background, CMG is a leading manufacturer of custom and stock rigid plastic packaging solutions, namely in the form of bottles, cups, containers, and closures, for many recognized consumer brands in the food, beverage, personal care, and healthcare markets. And if I have my history correct, CMG was formed about 19 years ago when Dooher Tool and Die merged with Custom Molders Corporation to create CMG Plastics. Jens, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, happy to be here, Ed. Thanks for asking me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I got so many questions for you, but let's start with the early years.
Right.
So let me take you back actually to your childhood. At that point, the family business was Dooher Tool and Die when you were growing up.
Correct.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, to what extent were you exposed to the family business as a child?
Oh, I've been in the family business since I could earliest remember. Just in terms of background, so my family started a business in 1966. It was founded by my father and my uncle. They were both German immigrants, tool makers, and started a business in 1966 in Kenilworth. I was born shortly thereafter, but the family business was always, even though we didn't talk necessarily around the kitchen table at dinner time, but it was always there. It was something I was always a part of. I would spend weeks there in the summertime, especially as a small kid, just goofing off, learning to drive a forklift, but also being around the business and understanding. When I got my driver's license, I was a delivery guy, but learned the basics of the business from the bottom up. But it was a constant part of my childhood for sure.
Yeah, not every young child has the opportunity to play. They play in the sandbox, maybe not with a forklift, but so that was.
Hopefully no one from OSHA is listening to this and wants to go back 30 years or 40 years ago. But yeah, so it was an interesting place. I learned a lot of valuable lessons in those early years. So.
Awesome. At what point would you say that it was clear that your path was going to take you into the family business? Was that always understood by you, or was there a point in time where you said, okay, I think I'm going to do this?
I think it was always known that this is what I was going to do. And looking back on that, I have a tinge of regret with that, only because maybe regret's a strong word, but it was a very clear path to move forward. But when I first went to college, my degree was plastics engineering. Talk about defining, right? Graduate high school and go right to studying plastics engineering. Yeah, I would say probably in high school, it became very clear that this was the direction I was going to go in.
So talk about maybe some of the early years. So you started into the business right after your college years.
I did.
Okay. So yeah. What were you doing and what was it like at that juncture of the company's history? What were you up to when you first arrived?
By the time I came in, 1989 was when I first joined the company full time and just out of college. And so the interesting thing about the business at that point is it had grown quite substantially from 1966 to 1989, and honestly had done it without a salesperson. It was just, we all harken back to the old days. Life was simpler. It was a little simpler because my father, Carl, and my uncle Walter had a great reputation, and business came to them just by referral. Whether it be a material supplier or a box supplier or somebody knows somebody, one thing leads to another and then a new opportunity, and they continue to grow year over year. Now, when I joined the company, we had a customer, a longtime customer. I can remember this going back to, my earliest being 10 years old. I remember my father talking about this customer. They were producing generic printer ribbon cartridges and typewriter cartridges for a company in Trenton. And they were a very big customer of ours for a long time. But in the mid 80s, right about the time I started going off to college, they had learned that customer was looking to get into their own molding business at the time. So at the time, it was looking 30-40% of our business disappear because the customer wanted to take this work in-house.
Mm.
My father and uncle, being the very much the entrepreneurial type, said, "The hell with that. Well, we're going to create our own product line," because honestly, we knew this product as well as they did. We had built them for years. The
Hmm.
only thing that we didn't have was how were we going to market it and sell it. They knew how to make it. They just didn't know how to market it and sell it. So they hired a rep firm in the beginning to help them sell. And then they hired a guy directly from that customer to come and work for us directly. He was a quality guy who had been in the plant all the time, had been the focus point that my
Hmm.
father and uncle were working with on a day-to-day basis, and they hired him. And he became a direct in-house salesperson. He was their first direct in-house salesperson, a guy by the name of John Krivda, who I owe a lot to, was my mentor when it came from business development. So right when I finished college, I came in and John and I worked directly on that new product line. And it was quickly apparent that as much as I love being in this business and I love the technical aspect of it, I'm not a technical person. I'm much better working with engineers than being an engineer or a toolmaker.
Hmm.
And quickly at that point, we grew that business over the next 4 or 5 years pretty substantially, to the point that when the customer started doing their own, we surpassed their business in terms of gross sales and net sales pretty quickly. So it
Wow.
was a fun story. So that was my first real entree into sales, business development, and really taking ownership of a product line within the overall business that we were doing. So I should make it clear that our business at the time was, we were what's known as a custom injection molder. So we
Hmm.
produced for a variety of different parts for a variety of different customers. You could say that we had 25 molding machines. We could be running 25 distinct products for 25 very distinct customers. So it was very much a service-based business. Even though
Hmm.
we were providing a manufactured part, it was a service-based business at that point. So
So that's an interesting entree into the company. It's welcome. By the way, our largest client may be going away. Go fix it.
yeah, I mean that amongst a whole bunch of other things. Like they didn't have a computer system. They still manually typed invoices. This is 1989, 1990. My father and uncle were very, look, these were guys that, they were tool makers. They worked really incredibly hard and did everything they could to support the customer. But when it came to things like, let's have a database of customers and how do we do a mailing and how do we run an, excuse me, run an ERP system or whatever it's going to be, they had no clue. So
Yeah,
John and I were the first ones to do that. And then my cousin Oliver came in about a year after I did, and he continued the modernization, if you will, of Dooher Tool and Die. So
nice, nice. So was there ever a point where you asked yourself, what am I doing here? Is this the right place for me to be? And if you did, tell me about that and how you navigated that.
I don't know that I ever got to that. I'm sure, look, there were days I was like, what the hell am I thinking? But no, I can't say that there was ever a point where I seriously considered doing something else. It was, as much as I liked the business, I liked the big machines. I loved the fact that we're producing lots of different parts and the engineering and the technical side of the business. I loved the fact that I was selling if it was plastic and it fit in our machines, I could make it work. I'd love that aspect of the development process of it. It was really cool. So I don't know that I ever really sat back and said I should think something else. One, because I had a good job too. So I
Yeah.
was paid okay, but I liked what I did and I liked the direction we were going. And I really thought after a couple of years, my cousin Oliver and I, we really thought, hey, we can do something here.
Mhm.
We've really got our parents have really provided a great stepping stone for us to take this business to the next level.
So what was that like working alongside? Were you pretty close with Oliver growing up and whatnot? What was that like working alongside your cousin?
It was great. Yeah, no, as much as we were cousins, I think ultimately we probably act more like brothers than we do cousins. I think he and I have obviously known each other since we were tiny, but spending as much time as you do together, I've spent more time with Oliver than I have with my wife, if you look at it from aggregate amount of time,
Sure.
right? He's my work wife. So.
Clearly you made that relationship work.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, of course. Yeah, no, look, we're still together today.
Yeah,
You
I
know.
know. I
So
know.
yeah, he's sitting about 12 feet away from me behind that wall over there.
I'm gonna come a little bit forward in history. There was a juncture there where Dooher Tool and Die and Custom Molders Group formed CMG Plastics. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be?
So what happened there was so we had moved from one building into another building. So we had grown quite substantially. So this is
Mhm.
1999, 98, I think it's probably when we first started thinking about it. Our
Mhm.
first building that we were in, sharing plow needed was our next door neighbor and needed the facility or needed to grow. And fortunately, we owned all the space where they needed to grow. So we had to pick up and move. So we moved into a brand new building. And I think there was we built a Taj Mahal, if you will. It was really fantastic. 110,000 square foot footprint, the latest and greatest modern machines, infrastructure, everything we could to do that we would need to really set ourselves up for going forward.
Mhm.
And then a couple things happened after that. So one, we had one very large customer at the time that was probably 10-15% of our business at the time, came back and hit us up for a pretty significant price decrease, took a margin hit there. That was the beginning of the problem. And then another very large customer pulled all their business in-house. So now we're where we were expecting a continued trajectory of growth. We're suddenly faced with this great big building that we built, took on debt to do this as well. And now two significant customers are picking up and moving out the door, or at least we're taking a margin hit at that point. At the same point, so to adjust that, we created a relationship with a vendor in China to do some sub-assembly work that we had been doing in the US, moved that to China. We also had another customer who moved operations to Mexico and
Mhm.
wanted us to support them close there. They were just over the border in Texas. So we created a partnership with a company there to move some molds. And suddenly, when you turn around, you're like, wait a second, I had one customer pull all this business out. Two, I took a margin hit. Three, I moved sub-assembly work to China and I moved other molding work to Canada. Sorry, to Texas rather. And you're like, wait, I still got this great big building. And part of the problem is from a growth standpoint, we were growing, but we weren't, look, we're not natural salespeople. We had never been trained in this. So we were still doing this all ourselves. And we had done some work with some consultants in terms of how do we build a sales force? How do we go develop the business further? But we would add $1 million in business and lose $1 million. It was very stagnant. It was like a plateau. I looked at our trajectory even now to where we are. We've hit several plateaus where you suddenly realize I have to do something at this point, which is stay where you are, downsize, or buy or merge or something like that.
Mhm.
And I think we were hitting that kind of plateau in 1999. Sorry, this is not 1999. This is, yeah, 1999 is when we moved. In 2006, after a couple of years of dealing with all this, we suddenly said, all right, you know what? We need to get out of this building. Let's find something smaller. Let's refocus the business again into a smaller, more niche-based opportunity.
Mhm.
And through that conversation, through a mutual salesperson, machinery salesperson, we had known of a company called Custom Molders Corporation. We'd known of them for years. We were friendly competitors. They were going through a change as well, where their largest customer was moving to Canada, and they asked them to move along with them and create a manufacturing facility right across the street from them. So suddenly the idea appeared as, wait a second, Custom Molders Corporation has this plant with all this now available machine time because they're moving everything or a significant portion of their business to Canada. We're
Mhm.
looking to downsize. At the same point, how do we continue to grow? So we sat down with Joe and Glenn, and next thing we merged the two companies and created Custom Molders Group. So
Wow. 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 That's wild. And were you and Oliver fairly aligned through that process in terms of what you needed to do? Did
yes,
you
yeah,
guys were very
yeah.
upfront and
Yeah,
clear
it has
communication?
been very rare where we are not aligned in terms of what's the right thing to do. The thing that I think that the biggest thing that makes one certainly what Oliver and I were doing, as well as what we're doing now with Joe and Glenn, or at least what we did through with CMG, was that this notion that look, the business always came first. Whatever we did
Mhm.
came second. So if you didn't take a salary for, or you cut your salary, you had to do that because the business always came first. And that was
Mhm.
passed on from our fathers. Joe and Glenn were very similar to that same mindset. So that's one of the reasons that we liked working with them. And our reason our partnership lasted for 19 years was because the same mindset that you did whatever it took to come from to make the business work. And it's important to know that Joe and Glenn's their father started a business in 1959. We're all second generation
Yeah.
molders and grew up in a very similar environment. All of us have never worked for anyone else until now. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, having known you for some time, it's something that's always fascinated me. So for CMG, the leadership, it's yourself, it's Oliver, it's Joe, it's Glenn, right?
Hmm.
How does every business decision not end in a tie?
You know what? I don't think we've ever had a scenario where we had a tie. Look, are there disagreements? Of course there are. And that's what makes it interesting.
Mhm.
Obviously, we all bring our own set of personal values and experiences with regard to every decision. But look, this is the reason the partnership worked is because all of us are focused on grow the business, take care of the customer, do whatever it takes. Yeah, are there bumps along the way? Of course. But no, our that basic understanding, that basic approach to business was common amongst all of us. And was we like to joke even to this day that as new opportunities came up, like I said, Oliver's sitting right over there. Joe is sitting right on the other side of me over here. The three of us traditionally have been the business development side of the business. So we'll find an opportunity, close it, and then we'll walk down to the hall, who's our CFO, to Glenn, or to Glenn, who's our CFO, and go, "Hey, Glenn, this is what we did. Pay for it." But and look, he was like, "Okay, great, well done. Let's make it work." We figure out a way to make it happen. So,
So when you established that, like how did you actually go through an exercise of establishing like clear roles, clear lines of communication, like up front, just to create that scenario where when there are issues, there is an environment or a platform to discuss them in a very, say, positive or at least a constructive way?
no, we didn't. In terms of the roles that we came in, they were all natural for us. We're four different people.
Mhm.
Joe's our CEO, and it is really is great at looking at the big picture, as well as keeping us focused and reminding us when we start to go off track in terms of, hey, guys, let's focus on what's important, right? Glenn has always been, even before we merged, was Custom Molders CFO as well as the HR manager as well. So that
Okay.
was a natural role for him. Oliver was always more technical than I was, so he took over more of an engineering role and sales engineering role. Like he's very involved in business development, but really from a technical side of it, he
Hmm.
became the technical side of it. And I've always been more inclined to marketing and business development. So it was a natural fit for the four of us. None of us had to really change our personalities to make it all work. Being in proximity with one another helps. Our hallway is our most productive space in the building, aside from molding machines. Yeah, the number of meetings that have been held in the hallway between our three offices, it's pretty incredible. But it just worked. I think we got lucky, but we're well trained by our parents.
And it's clear now that you all walked into this new entity, CMG Plastics, with foundational strengths, and there was seems like there was just a mutual respect for each other's strength. Okay,
Hmm.
Joe, you do that, you lead because that's your strength, and then
Yeah,
Oliver, you do this because that's your strength, and Glenn and
right.
yourself. It seemed
Yeah,
like there was a healthy respect for okay, let's play to each other's strengths and not try to change.
of
Is that
course. Yeah.
okay?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of discussion about it. I think we came up with our titles in about 6 minutes. Um, you know, so it was, but we're not a title-based company.
Yeah.
We look around and go, well, I'm the chief this, or you're that, it's your responsibility. No, it's all of our responsibility. And all of us being plant people, which I think is important. We all grew up in a molding plant. We like being in a plant. I'm going to miss that someday is not being able to walk into a door and walk into a factory and hear the machines running and solving problems, helping the team out there succeed. Um, you know.
So looking back and maybe not even to deep history, but across the years of CMG Plastics, were there any like can you think of any kind of I'll call them pivotal moments, like big moments where you had to make a big decision as a leadership team? Maybe talk about one and how you guys came to consensus.
I think so. When we merged the company at the time, we were still custom molders at the point. If it was plastic and it could fit in our molding machines, we would make it.
Hmm.
And it took us about 2 to 3 years to figure out what we wanted to be. We knew we had to specialize in something.
Hmm.
We didn't want to just go around and be just another guy who sells machine time. As you and I have joked for
Yeah.
a lot of times over the years that, yeah, we sell machine time, but we do a lot more than that. But we couldn't just be this broad offering to the marketplace. It took us about 2, 3 years to figure out what we wanted to do. And that's when we realized that packaging was the world that we liked. We had a very large customer at the time who we produced a lot of packaging components for, but we
Mhm.
liked the cadence of the business. We liked the type of business. We liked the volume. We liked the margins. And it was in when was it? I'm going to say 2009. Yeah, 2009, 2010 is when we got our first real break with regard to quoting or
Mhm.
a piece of business. And it was for
Mhm.
a very large dairy, well-known dairy company here in the US. And through that process, we had quoted this customer probably 4 times before we got this piece of business. And now it's important to understand that in the past, we would quote things and say the tooling or the product that came off of this is owned by the customer. So we're providing a custom product. They own the tooling, we provide the molding machine. But anything else that went along with that kind of auxiliary equipment would also be owned by the customer. So we would approach this packaging world in that same approach. So we quoted the customer, it's going to cost you $300,000 for a mold, and we need automation, which is another $400,000. We
Mhm.
never got the business, right? Until we finally turned around and said, wait a second, time out. Let's approach this from let's fund everything. All we want is an agreement from the customer. And when we learned that lesson, our business just took off in terms of, especially with that customer went from $1 million in business to over just under $9 million a year in business right now in terms of
Wow.
what happened. But that's the nature of the business. But we had to come together and go, guys, we need to fund this. If this is the world that we want to go in, because we've been burned by or lost opportunities time after time in this world because customers don't want to hear it. They'll give you an agreement, they'll make a commitment, and they'll provide a shortfall. So if they don't take what they say they're going to do, you can get that kind of commitment, but you guys have to fund everything. And that's the way that the packaging world worked. And once we all came to agreement that, hey, this is the way we need to proceed. Yes, this is the world that we want to be in. Our business really took off. And then that presented some other challenges, obviously, as you can as imagine, as the business grows after that. So
Yeah, for sure, for sure. But that was a big pivotal moment that really put the company to a next level and then poised to then be acquired by an even bigger entity in that category. So,
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that was the decision point. When we made that decision, that's what got us to where we are today. So,
so let's talk about that. So late last year, it was, I guess it was around September timeframe or October timeframe, the business was acquired by Berry Global.
mhm.
Talk about how did that possibility of selling first start to take shape? Like, how did that start to emerge, this possibility, and how was it addressed amongst you and the leadership team?
We had actually been talking about selling for probably 10, 12 years prior to that.
Wow.
And I shouldn't say selling, but it was the opportunity of we had seen what was going on in the marketplace. We had been working with an investment banker for several years, someone who specializes in the plastics packaging world. And knowing that, hey, at some point we were going to sell. Now we all have kids, right? And Joe's son, Lenny's in the business, but the rest of our kids aren't involved in the business at this point. But knowing that, hey, at some point we were going to have to do something,
Hmm.
whether it was capitalize on our success or we wind up in a situation where we need to, how do we expand further, right?
Hmm.
So we've been having these conversations for several years and got close with 2 companies before and got reasonably close. Let's put it that way in terms of where there were offers made and then they fizzled out shortly thereafter. But that process, I think, helped us focus on what was important about the business and what we needed to do to improve the business to be able to sell eventually. I think
Hmm.
it helped us become more focused. It certainly helped us become more profitable with John's help, John, who's our investment banker,
Hmm.
by him meeting with him quarterly and having discussions saying, look, this is what I see you guys need to do. And that certainly helped us focus and make the business more profitable. What ultimately led us to sell to Barry was in beginning of 2024. We had just come off of, or we were in the midst of a significant growth period, and we were spending a lot of money because it seems like every single new piece of new business we bring in requires a new piece of machinery. And now that is a thing that goes back to my earliest remembrance of my parents talking about the business is my dad would come and go, and we just bought a new machine. And my mom would be like, you just bought a new machine. Why are you buying another machine? And it's because the business calls for it, right? One thing leads to another. And it felt every new piece of business that we were bringing in required a new machine. And it just so happens that everyone was $1 million. Let's do this. That's $1 million. Let's do this. Oh, it's 2 machines. It's $2 million, right? And we had gone through a major expansion in our facility in Canada that was pretty substantial. And the problem was that one, we kept growing and growing, spending the money, getting the capex, which we could always get it for, was becoming a bit of a burden. Maybe burden's a strong word, but it was, Oliver and I had always joked is, oh, you just wrap yourself in the blanket of debt. Just take it, get a snuggle up to it, warm up to it, embrace it because you'll pay it off. We've been doing it for years and years and years. But as we got a little bit older, we're all in various ranges in terms of where we are in different positions in our life. It was Joe who I think said probably the real thing that I think brought it home for everybody, which was, hey, if we keep growing this, going this direction, at some point we've been really lucky. But if we make a mistake and having spent $3, $4 million, even though we're doing close to $70 million in sales, but you make a mistake at three, $4 million in capex, our runway to fix that is getting shorter and shorter. Joe's got 7 grandkids now. He's looking at his next stage of life. And to think that I don't want to be doing this when I'm 80 years old. I've got all these grandkids. I want to be doing this, that, and that.
Yeah.
And it hit home for all of us. It really did it. But we also needed partners. We're a small company competing against behemoths. Berry is a $10 billion organization. Amcor, which just bought Berry, is a $10 billion organization. But everyone else that we really compete with are doing hundreds of millions of dollars and can afford to spend lots of money on stock products, which we barely had any at the point. We managed to hold our own and I think did really well against them. But to really have this business grow, it just wasn't in it for us at this point. It's time to find a partner.
That's a few really tremendous takeaways. One, that long view. So you sold in 24, but you most certainly didn't decide in 24 that's what you were going to do. You actually put that train in motion some almost 10 years prior.
And I think it's important because it really helped us focus. If we say, look, whether we sell or don't, but we need to approach every day as if we are going to sell at some point, because I think it helps sharpen the focus. It helps motivate you. And it helps certainly from a development standpoint. What's your story? What do you exist? It helps refine that. Before, I joked that, yeah, we sell machine time. And John would hate it when I would say that 10 years ago. He'd be like, all right, I'm going to get up and leave because that's not what you do. You do more than that. But no, it helped focus us on the markets we wanted to be in and certainly helped our speech, or at least our elevator pitches in those with those customers rather, was saying, this is what we do and this is where we want to be and how we do it. And by saying we're all things to all people, that's not an effective strategy. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So you ended up selling to Berry Global. Were there other potential suitors in the consideration set around that time, or were they really the front runner?
Yeah, so selling to Berry was something, if you asked me a year and a half ago, I would have told you that's the last thing I'd ever want to do. But yeah, there were several. So we actually started a process in January of 2024. So a sales process is you create the book, your banker at that point puts it out to a bunch of different companies. I don't recall the number of companies that looked at the book, but it was dozens easily. Out of that came 5 potential people or customers or sorry, companies that were interested in us, 2 that were strategic like Berry, and then the rest were all private equity. So private equity was a part of what we looked at too. We weren't necessarily thrilled about private equity, but there were 1 or 2 that offered some real options. All of us have heard horror stories about private equity. I don't believe them all. I think there's some really good people, and I think the ones that we had discussions with would have been really great partners. Berry was not part of the original kind of discussions. They came up late. And when our investment bankers came to us and said, hey, Berry Global is interested in having a conversation, our immediate response was no, last one we want to talk to. And the reason for that was in our market, they were perceived as not very responsive, a bit obtuse, probably a little too big for themselves, couldn't deliver, had some real customer service issues. And frankly, they were a little bit easy to sell against because we position ourselves as a non-Berry customer or as a non-Berry supplier. We'll give you the support, all the things you never got with them. But they're so big, you can't leave them. They're everywhere. They're omnipresent to that extent.
Yeah.
So Berry came into the process and we initially said, no, why would we ever want to deal with these people? They're probably all jerks and they're going to tear us apart. It's not going to be good. And again, I think it was Joe at first who said, no, look, guys, we have always listened to everything over the years. Let's listen. Let's have a conversation with them. And we did. They came up. We did a presentation to them. We got to meet a bunch of people from there. And lo and behold, you know what? Hey, these are real people. And they were at the time, not at the time, but we certainly perceived that what they were telling us was honest. They owned past mistakes and understood and said, yeah, we realize that we have this perception in the marketplace, but here's why we think that perception came up, and here's what we've done over the years to fix it. And then every single interaction we had with them after that was positive, more and more positive. I mean, from the top down and to now being a very global employee, it's amazing how great these people are. They are really dedicated to supporting us as a new partner to them, but dedicated to doing whatever it takes to get the customer the parts they need when they need it and being a really good supplier. So we were really pleasantly surprised in terms of that. Never thought that this would be a company we wind up selling to. But at the end of the day, they really became the best partner for us. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. And if something resonates, it's despite the size, the values probably aligned. There was integrity, there was an honesty, there was an owning of mistakes and a desire for growth and to do good for customers. And that all seemed to match up well with so much of what CMG stands for, you know?
exactly. Yeah, no, from our values, we're very much aligned. They like to call themselves like we're the smallest big company that's out there. And I see it. It's true. Look, it's a big company. Are there processes that you now have to go through or things that can become a little bit red tape, if you want to call it, or whatever, a little cumbersome? Of course, you have to do that. Otherwise, it's the Wild West. I get
Mhm.
that. But they owned their past mistakes and, like I said, gave us really good reasons as to why they felt that they were there. And this is why they're now different. And it's really been an incredibly positive experience so far. So,
That's awesome. If you could give one great piece of advice to, say, a family business leader or a family leadership team that is in that mode of contemplating selling, what would be one thing you'd want them to take away?
talk to everybody. Try to, if you wind up in a scenario where you're starting to create perceptions or preconceived notions, rather, of who the person is across the table, get that out of your head because you never know what you're going to find. Find yourself a good investment banker or a good consultant to help you with
Mhm.
that because to try to do it yourself can be really challenging. But find somebody that you trust and have a good rapport. And I would say, even if you're not ready to do it, start having those conversations now. Get somebody in now to say, all right, here's my plan. I want to sell 5, 10, 7 years from now in this marketplace. This is the world that I'm in. What do you think is the best way to proceed with this? And the good ones will give you that advice. John was from Plant Moran, was our PMCF is probably is what I should call him. He was great. We called him at the end. He was our consigliere. He really was a great asset to lean on over the years. But
Excellent.
talk to everybody. Talk to your competitors. Talk to your suppliers, have those conversations, learn it's out there. If you wind up in a tunnel mindset or tunnel vision mindset, it could become a real challenge for you. So,
Understood. Looking to the future now as part of the Berry Global organization, what's something that's really exciting you now, either in the company, in the industry? What's something that you're looking at to say, wow, that's really exciting me right now?
for me personally,
Yeah.
yeah, for me personally is access to resources that we'd never had before. We in the past, the way that we would approach a customer being look, doing 60, $70 million in sales, that's not a small company, right? But we're trying to sell to the McCormicks of the world or the J&Js of the world. So they're used to dealing with companies that have a tremendous amount of resources. We didn't have those. We could certainly find them, but it would involve working with our suppliers and leaning on them to be able to help us. At Barry, we have somebody for everything. You want to learn about corrugated packaging? We've got somebody who does that. You want to learn about in-mold labels? We've got somebody who does that. Having access to all those resources is really exciting and makes our conversations that much more productive with customers. We're working on a project now where it's replacing a customer produced item, but it involves a fair amount of change to their lines. We have a whole
Hmm.
group that comes in and says, all right, we can help with that is you, the customer, we can help with your manufacturing process. So it
Wow.
really is, it's pretty cool. It's
That is
pretty cool.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's all the things that if I could think back, if I wrote down everything I'd ever wished for over my last 40 years or 30 years of doing this, if I could write it all down, a lot of it would be, if we only had this guy or we only had this. Having that all now is really great. So,
That's awesome. In the reverse of being de-energized after the sale, it almost seems like you're re-energized with all the possibilities.
oh,
It's
absolutely.
exciting
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah. I don't know how much longer I'll be here. I hope to be here for several more years. But yeah, it's really exciting. I love coming to work before. I loved working with Joe and Oliver and Glenn. I'm going to miss that at some point because obviously we all move on. I look at them much more than just business partners. We're all family at this point,
Mhm.
especially with everything that we've been through. But it is really exciting in terms of what this next chapter could bring for all of us.
And irrespective, yeah, it's truly an amazing journey with so much to be proud of and grateful for. Last question. If any of our listeners wanted to connect with you, either to learn more about you or the work you're doing at CMG Plastics as part of Berry, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
So best way would probably be through LinkedIn. You can connect me with there, send me a message, and I'm certainly happy to talk with anybody. They could reach out to you directly, Ed, and you obviously have my contact info. Happy to do that. You can also come to the website, cmgplastics.com, and we've got a couple avenue. All the contact forms all come to me. So if you wanted to go that way, you could all come to me. That email will eventually find its way to my desk. So,
Awesome.
um,
Awesome. Jens, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. This was amazing.
yeah.
Uh, Awesome. So we've been speaking with Jens Duerr, Director of Marketing and Business Development for CMG Plastics, now part of Berry Global. And I'm your host, Ed Delia. Thanks so much for joining us here at Growing Up B2B, and have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Jens.
No, thank you, Ed.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning into Growing Up B2B. To explore more episodes and insights, visit podcast.delianet.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice. Having worked with hundreds of family-led businesses across my career, and being a second-generation leader myself, I'm on a mission to help every family business I meet achieve next-level growth for their organization. So feel free also to connect with me on LinkedIn and let's support each other. You can also find out more about my company at delianet.com. Again, I'm your host, Ed Delia, and thanks so much for joining us today. Take care.